Hello everyone, welcome to the debate on Press TV. I'm your host, Behruz Najafi. Sirens sounded overnight in the Dimona area when an SA-5 surface-to-air missile landed 30 kilometers from the Israeli nuclear reactor. Officials in Tel Aviv saying that the anti-aircraft missile was fired from Syria in the course of an Israeli strike there against assets that could be used for a potential attack. Syria has complained to the UN Security Council over the Israeli air raid. Some U.S. and Israeli media have attributed the attack near Dimona to Iran that had pledged revenge against Israel's recent sabotage at Natanz nuclear facility. No comments from Tehran. Let's watch a background report and then we'll explore aspects of the story with our guests.
On Tuesday, a powerful explosion rocked a sensitive military factory in central Israel. The blast near the town of Raml sent up a massive plume of fire and smoke, which could be seen from miles away. Israeli sources said the incident happened during a routine test and caused no casualties. Less than 48 hours later, Israel again found itself under threat. The regime said a Syrian surface-to-air missile had exploded near the Dimona nuclear plant. Tel Aviv said the Syrian missile was fired toward one of its aircraft over the Golan Heights, but it overflew its target and landed in Israel. Following the explosion, Israel's Minister of Military Affairs, Benny Gantz, admitted that the regime's missile system failed to intercept the anti-aircraft missile. Gantz said an investigation has been launched into the failure of the so-called Iron Dome at stopping the projectile. Commentators believe that the incident further highlighted Israel's vulnerability.
This shows how Dimona, which is actually one of the most sensitive spots of the in occupied territories, is vulnerable. None of the defense system, either Iron Dome or either any other defense system of the Zionist regime, have been worked there, and they were actually infiltrated by these rockets that were fired from the Syrian side.
U.S. media reports said the incident points to a possible Iranian involvement. Israeli media also said that the anti-missile system around Dimona plant had been on high alert following the act of sabotage at Iran's Natanz nuclear facility earlier this month. However, Iran has not yet commented on the recent events. The incidents come at a time when Israel continues with its belligerent policies in the region. Tel Aviv has conducted hundreds of airstrikes on Syria over the past years. The regime has also been violating Lebanon's airspace on an almost daily basis. Despite all this, the regime has met little international backlash. Syria and Lebanon have time and again called on the international community to hold Tel Aviv to account, but to no avail. Israel has never disclosed its nuclear arsenal, and it does not allow international inspections of its nuclear sites. But the regime's possession of nuclear weapons is an open secret. In 2008, former U.S. President Jimmy Carter said Tel Aviv was in possession of at least 150 nuclear warheads.
The United States has more than 12,000 nuclear weapons, and the Soviet Union has about the same. And as you know, Great Britain and France have several hundred, and Israel has 150 or more.
With warmongers ruling in Tel Aviv, taking provocative actions on a near-daily basis, the region resembles a tinderbox. Following the recent incidents, the regime now has good reasons to think twice that any escalation and miscalculation could turn into an open confrontation in the region.
Now, joining me in this debate show will be founder of the American Institute for Foreign Policy, Michael Lane in Washington, D.C., and journalist and political analyst Elijah Magnier in Brussels. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Let me turn to Washington, D.C. Michael, two explosions rocked very sensitive Israeli military and nuclear installations in less than 48 hours. What's your reading of what's happened?
Well, if I was in Israel, I'd be very concerned. This is significant cause for concern. There's still some discussion, some debate, whatever you want to call it, over what the actual target was, particularly of the second one, the SA-5 missile. But the fact of the matter is, if you get a significant explosion landing or exploding within 20 miles, 30 kilometers of the sensitive nuclear reactor, in the desert, then I think if I was Israeli leadership, I would be examining very, very closely what they were doing and how they might increase their defenses. The fact that they have come out with an admission that the Iron Dome defense system did not work in this particular case doesn't mean that it's useless and doesn't work in most cases, but it is very clear that it didn't work in this case, and that's another significant reason to be concerned about this whole thing. I would be conducting a top to bottom inspection and review of the Israeli operations and defense mechanisms in the area as a result of what's going on here. This is just serious, that's all.
Of course, it's not the first time that the Israeli dome has proved to be defective. We had Hezbollah rockets before also. Let me go to Elijah. There have been contradictory media coverage of the recent attacks. How would you assess the goings-on? Are chickens coming home to roost for Israel as is involved in its destabilization efforts in the region?
Yes, indeed, there are two versions here. The Israeli version that likes us to believe that it was an errant missile, that was a surface-to-air missile. And there is the Iranian media saying, well, this is a revenge to the Israeli sabotage to the Natanz nuclear site. Technically speaking, normally a surface-to-air missile would explode when it reaches a certain limit of its range. And we saw in Yemen that the Houthis are using similar missiles, the S-200, and they removed the self-destruction piece of the missile so it can hit the target when it reached its maximum range without exploding in the air, and the debris would be insignificant on the people on the ground. We see in this case that there is a similarity between the Houthi style of the missile and the Syrian missile launch against within 30 kilometers from the Israeli nuclear Dimona site. And we see that the explosion was on the ground, and we hear how the Israelis are so confused by saying, well, it's exploded in the air, when the photos showed that it was exploding on the ground, not in the air. And what your guest said, I concur, that there is really a good failure of the Israeli interception system that is not working, whatever they improve it. If one missile managed to go through, what can we imagine if the axis of the resistance in case of Israeli waging a war against Lebanon or Iran or Syria, flooding the Israeli interception system and launching tens of dozens of missiles, then what's going to happen to the Israeli interception system? I think the Israelis are going to start a maneuver next month simulating a similar scenario. But again, this has been going on since years, and we saw how the American Patriot, the British, and the Israeli interception system is not working in Saudi Arabia against the Houthi drones and missiles, and it's certainly not going to work in Israel. And the solution is not to improve the Israeli interception missiles, but for Israel to stop violating the Syrian and the Lebanese sovereignty and stop carrying attacks against Syria. Israel said it has carried out over 1,000 attacks violating the Syrian sovereignty. It has no right to do so, but there is no accountability. The world is just watching and allowing Israel to do it.
Okay. Now, Michael, as you know, the Dimona nuclear facility is widely believed to be the centerpiece of Tel Aviv's undeclared nuclear weapons program. So the question is, how can Tel Aviv oppose Washington's efforts to revive the Iran nuclear deal and at the same time fail to come clean about its own nuclear arsenal?
I guess you do what you think you can get away with. In this particular case, it's really quite easy. I'm not going to allege that it makes sense or that it's not hypocritical, but I think it's very easy to discuss or talk about the Israeli point of view. Their point of view on their own program is, we have it. We've had it for a while. We're not going to change that, and so that's not a topic for discussion. As far as their viewpoint on the Iranian nuclear development program, their point of view is that's an existential threat to us. They don't have it yet. We don't want them to get it. We will do whatever we need to do to keep them from getting it. There may be an inherent conflict in those different points of view there, but nonetheless, that's exactly the mentality of the thinking coming out of Tel Aviv.
Yep. Unfortunately. Okay, and Elijah, Israel hit the outer skirts of the Syrian capital again, and this is not the first time. And Damascus has complained to the UN Security Council about it, and it says that it's in violation of the 1974 agreement on disengagement. Is the UN able to enforce its own charter and stop such aggression?
Israel is violating every single United Nations agreement in relation to Syria. It is occupying the Golan Heights, and it is bombing the Syrian capital and other locations in Syria, and it has no right to do so. But Israel said it prefers to have ISIS on the border rather than to have the Syrian army. And ISIS is gone now. All the attacks that the Israelis are doing are useless, are not changing anything on the ground. It's trying to destroy the effective of the Syrian army that is resupplying itself. It's trying to just say, hey, I'm here. I don't want the nuclear deal to happen. Look at me. I can do something, but it's not changing anything. So all these violations of the United Nations Security Council are obvious to the world, and the world doesn't really care, as there is no accountability, there is no respect of the international law, and Israel will continue bombing selective target. And if we think what the Israeli defense minister said, we target 1 out of 5 weapon shipments to Syria. So what's the point?
Good question. Now, Michael, we don't see, or better yet, let's say we don't hear any outcry from the international community while Israel keeps bombing Syria. What's the reason for this silence?
Well, it certainly is deafening silence, isn't it? They've been doing it for quite a while, as we've already discussed. They seem to do it frequently, and there doesn't seem to be any pushback at all. I believe that there's a silent assent on the part of at least the West that Israel is taking reasonable action to defend itself against threats perceived or real, and that their incursions into foreign territory for these defensive purposes are therefore legitimate. As far as the rest of the world is concerned that's not traditionally aligned with the West, and I'm not talking about minor countries, I'm talking about ones that would normally be adversarial to the West, they don't seem to be putting up a big argument. And I don't, I wish I could be a fly on the wall in the Kremlin someday and find out when they talk about this what they're saying. But I don't know why there is so little objection or even noise coming out of countries that are considered to be adversarial to the West.
Okay. Now, Elijah, let's look at another aspect of this. Israel tacitly confirmed it was behind this recent terrorist act against a sensitive Iranian nuclear facility in Natanz. The U.S. that's trying to get back to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, and also the EU that are still, part of the deal, they did not condemn the attack, despite the fact that that attack tried to derail the talks in Vienna. Is this not a hypocritical move by Iran's Western interlocutors?
Absolutely. Under the excuse of Israel has the right to defend itself, Israel is assassinating nuclear scientists, is attacking boats and ships crossing in the sea, is doing every single violation in any international law book by saying, I want to be part of the deal and I don't like this deal to happen. And nobody is listening to Israel. But Iran is defending itself, and this is where Iran has a right to defend itself when it is attacked, particularly by unlawful acts like a sabotage, when Israel recognizes that. And the nuclear deal is going on, is continuing. I think it's, at the end of the day, it is in the benefit of Iran as it in the benefit of Israel for this deal not to happen, so Iran can reach its 90% and tell the world, now I am on the full capacity, and Israel then will tremble even further. The Israelis are unconscious of what they are doing. Stopping the nuclear deal, it means allowing Iran to go to the 90% enrichment purity. And that, I don't think, is what everybody in the world wants. So allow the deal to go through. It was signed in 2015. Just let the world respect its word that it did not engage so far. No compliance from the US or the EU. It's time to do it.
Yeah, the U.S. just pulled some cold water on it. It said there is no guarantee the next administration will not leave this. Now, let's get back to the main topic. Michael, Israeli media has called the Syrian missile an errant projectile, not a deliberate attack deep inside Israel. Now, yet others are attributing this to Iran, citing the country's promise to revenge the Israeli sabotage at its Natanz facility recently. What's your take?
Well, more than Israeli media, I think it was the actual spokesman for the IDF that said it was an errant missile. So Israel doesn't want the world to think that its nuclear facilities are within reach of a surface-to-air missile. They want people to think that it's safe, secure, that even though they have allegedly, it is believed that they have multiple nuclear weapons, as President Carter said in that speech that you played in the setup piece. They want the world to look at them as safe, responsible custodians of those particular things. So it's not unusual that no matter what the facts are, they would try and make it look that way. On the other hand, Iran certainly has a grievance against the bombing of its facility, and they would like the world to think, whether it's true or not, that that this was something of a retaliation for the Israeli incursion. And so until we see transparently the intelligence laid on the table, it'll be a matter of, do I believe this side or do I believe that side? And since we will never in the immediate future or even the midterm future see that intelligence evidence laid on the table so that we can make up our own minds, it's a matter of choosing sides based on which one seems to have the more believable story at this time, or just who's your friend, and do you choose to believe your friend over choosing to believe your adversary?
Okay. Now, Elijah, Israeli Minister of Military Affairs has admitted that a so-called Iron Dome system was not able to intercept the anti-aircraft missile fired from Syria. Is this not an indication of the vulnerability of the system that Tel Aviv has always boasted of?
Absolutely. If we imagine a general war where the Hamas in Gaza is involved, Hezbollah is involved, just both of these two groups, then I think Israel will have a lot to fear. And I think the recognition of the Israeli defense minister is a legitimate one to understand, hopefully, that the Israeli interception defensive system is vulnerable, it is not accurate, it cannot protect Israel. And I hope that the Israeli will revise their aggressive policy toward the neighboring countries in the Middle East. I think it is convenient for all sides to say it's an errant missile. It is convenient for President Assad, for Iran, and for Israel. But who is going to learn the lesson here? The only actor here is requested to act is Israel to stop violating Syria sovereignty and stop attacking Syrian targets. And I hope that what the defense minister said, it's a lesson that other missiles can be fired, particularly when Syria will be less under stress and when the economic sanction will be lifted and Al-Qaeda and other jihadists in Idlib will be cleared. Then I think Israel will no longer violate the Syrian territory.
Now, Michael, who's responsible for insecurity and tension in this region? The Tel Aviv regime assassinates Iranian scientists, it attacks nuclear facilities, it raids Syria time and time and again, it violates the Lebanese airspace, and you name it, and yet it blames others for stirring the situation.
Well, of course it does. That's called public relations and diplomacy. look, there's more than enough blame to go around here, but I firmly believe that Israel is acting out of genuine concern for its own existence, and therefore they would allege, with justification in their own minds and in the minds of most of the world, I would say, that they are acting as a defensive, responsible party and trying to keep themselves from becoming engaged in a larger conflict. On the other hand, the litany of things that you pointed out is a very real list. The Israelis would point to, okay, that's fine, that's what we're doing, but let's take a look at what Iran is doing at the same time. Designated by the United States State Department as exporter of international terrorism, shipping missiles to Hezbollah and Hamas, funding and giving weapons and arms to the Houthis that are all destabilizing actions according to the United States State Department.
Of course, no proof has been given for that. Now, let me ask you, Elijah, we only have 1 minute for Elijah. Elijah, go ahead.
I think it's really amusing to hear the word that Israel is defending itself when Israel is attacking all the time. There's not once that Hezbollah or the Syrian fired a missile against Israel starting a war, but Israel is taking the initiative all the time. And I think the aggression here is the Israeli aggression. And this existential threat, the existential threat is the nuclear bomb are in the hand of the Israelis, not the Iranian or Hezbollah or Hamas or the Houthi. They have 150 plus nuclear in hand. That is an existential threat to every single country around Israel and not for Israel.
Okay, on that note, we'll come to the end of this debate show. Let me thank our guests. We had founder of the American Institute for Foreign Policy, Michael Lane in Washington, D.C., and journalist and political analyst Elijah Magnier in Brussels with their contribution. And thank you for watching this debate show. I've been your host, Behruz Najafi. I'll see you next time.